What is going on, everybody? It is the Icebreaker here, back with another video. And yes, more hockey content, but this video is going to be a little bit different compared to videos that I've normally done on this channel. My focus is mainly on just the NHL overall and all the NHL teams. I don't usually dive into many prospects, but I had to give this guy a shout. We all know what's going on right now with Connor Bedard. He is the projected #1 overall pick for this upcoming draft. And he is just absolutely abolishing the WHL right now. So if you guys think there's a clear tanking problem in the NHL, it's for good reason. When you look at this guy right here, Connor Bedard, 17 years old. He has 123 points in 47 games in the WHL this season. 59 goals, 64 assists. Absolutely insane. His production basically producing at the same rate that Connor McDavid did in his draft year. So basically, we all know that this guy is going to be the next premier superstar in this league. And there's a reason why a lot of teams want to tank to get that #1 overall pick, because this guy is truly a franchise-changing, game-breaking talent. So getting into the topic of today's video, obviously there's a lot of really bad teams that are missing a franchise cornerstone piece to build around and, to bring them back from the dead and make them a competitive team again. So, there's a lot of teams that maybe deserve him, a lot of teams that need him the most. But for me, this list is going to be my top 5 teams that I feel is the ideal fit for Connor Bedard. Not for the organization, but for Connor Bedard himself. And you'll see what I mean once we get into the list here. But yeah, which teams are the best fit for Connor Bedard? And let's get into the list. Honorable mentions first, of course. We're doing the bottom 8 teams in the league in terms of the standings right now, because those are the teams that I think will be most likely in contention for this #1 overall draft pick. All right, so kicking off with the honorable mentions here for Connor Bedard's ideal fit of a team to play for. These are all teams that obviously are very bad and are, in huge need of a superstar talent on their roster. But these are 3 teams in particular that I personally don't feel are the best fit for Connor Bedard. So let's kick things off with the Philadelphia Flyers. For me, this is simple. It's just straight up their lack of direction. I know that they've gotten a little bit younger over the last year or so, but still, I don't feel like Chuck Fletcher has really embraced the rebuild quite yet. He didn't really do much at the trade deadline. That's a topic for another video. Obviously, they had a very disappointing trade deadline, in my opinion, but I don't really think this team is fully committed to a rebuild yet. I don't really like the supporting cast. There's not a lot of young talent that I'm really that excited about. I know Travis Konecny's had himself a great season, but he's already like 26 years old. And by the time, if Bedard does go to the Flyers, by the time they're ready to contend, like the supporting cast is going to be a lot older. And yes, unless they have like better, high-end prospects that they draft in the coming years. But outside of guys like Cutter Gauthier, what really on this Flyers team excites you? Because I don't really see much. Carter Hart hasn't been himself the last couple of years. The blue line is not that good in my opinion. I don't know what the type of ceiling Cam York has, as an example there. But the main reason why I don't want Bedard to land in Philly is John Tortorella. Him alone, I just feel like it's a bad fit. Him coaching Connor Bedard, I just feel like he's the type of guy to be a little bit of a thorn in people's sides. I mean, he's benched really good players. He's benched like Kevin Hayes, even though he was one of their leading scorers this season on multiple occasions. Like, I don't know. I feel like this guy, like, he wants to get his best out of his players, but I think he takes it a little bit too far at times. Like, if he was on a competitive team, John Tortorella would be a good fit. But for a team that's not very good, I just don't see why, a fit would be there with Connor Bedard and John Tortorella coexisting. I feel like Tortorella would be a guy who would maybe ask a little bit too much of him, ask him to do things that Bedard's not known for. He's known for being an offensive guy, and I feel like he's going to try to instill him to be a better two-way player, which might be good for his development, but he's a guy that, is going to punish you for making a mistake and not making you learn from it. He's just going to punish you and bench you and stuff like that. I feel like he's the type of coach to kill a young player's confidence and kind of disrupt their development. So I just don't like that fit overall. John Tortorella, for me, personally, I just don't respect him as a hockey coach. I really just don't agree with his methods, especially for a rebuilding team or who claim to be a bad team or claim to be competitive but are actually not that good. I just don't think he's the right fit. Like, I don't mind John Tortorella person. I'm not going to get into that because I don't know him personally. But as a coach, I don't really care for him. And I feel like him alone would just destroy young players' confidence. And we've seen in the past what he's done to many of the Flyers players. And I just don't like this fit for Philadelphia, to be honest. Or Connor Bedard, not Philadelphia. Philadelphia would be lucky to have him. But Connor Bedard, I feel like he would just completely drowned there, in my opinion. Next here on the honorable mentions, I got the Chicago Blackhawks. They're a team that arguably needs Connor Bedard the most because they literally have no roster as it currently stands. They traded Patrick Kane and Max Domi recently, so they're a team that's literally starting from scratch. They've also traded, other young players on their team that they could have built around in this past offseason, and Alex DeBrincat and Kirby Dach, just to name a couple. But yeah, they're really just starting a rebuild. And if I'm going to be frank, Connor Bedard deserves to be on a team that already has a foundation built and a competitive team. I want Connor Bedard for the talent that he is. He needs to be on a competitive team, a team that has a chance to at least push for a playoff spot next season. And I'm not saying that any of these teams I have above him will be playoff teams as soon as he steps foot on their team, but all I'm saying is that those teams are far more competitive than where the Blackhawks are right now in their current state. And for me, the Blackhawks, I feel like they're at the very least 5 years away from even being in playoff discussions, let alone being a Stanley Cup contender. And I feel like Bedard, he's just really going to be alone there for a while. Like, I know they have a couple of good prospects that they've started to gain. I know Lucas Reichel has looked pretty solid in a small sample size this season, and he could be a player that they could build around for the future. And I do like the Kevin Korchinski pick as well. The blue line, those two played together, him and Bedard did at the World Juniors this past season. So I feel like, there's a couple of prospects that they have, but they still need to continue to build through the draft. And it still feels like it's going to be a while before the Hawks are going to make any sort of noise, especially in a weaker Western Conference. It's going to be a while for them to do anything, and I just feel like Bedard is going to wait quite a while before the Blackhawks make the playoffs, and I want him to be in a competitive team, like I said, so I don't really like the fit for him personally, but obviously the Blackhawks definitely deserve him, right? And also I got the Sharks as an honorable mention. It's kind of the same reasoning. I'll keep it a little bit shorter, but I feel like they haven't even really decided to grasp completely on a rebuild either. I know they just trade away Timo Meier, so maybe that's them moving into this direction, but you still have a lot of pretty bad contracts. I mean, Thomas Hertl's getting paid now. I don't know why he decided to re-sign there, because it feels like the Sharks are going to be entering, a period of a lot of dark years. Logan Couture is obviously a veteran. That Erik Karlsson contract, despite the amazing season he's having, I don't envision him repeating that season, and just the contract is absolutely atrocious. So it's going to be tough for this team to really rebuild properly. So that's the reason why the Sharks are probably not going to be that competitive for a while as well. I just think their timeline for contention is a little bit uncertain for those reasons. I do like a couple of their prospects. William Eklund, hasn't really played much this season. I believe he had a point in his very first game, if I'm not mistaken, against the Capitals. But he's been a guy that hasn't quite developed the way I would have liked. Those last couple of years have been a little bit weird for me, but I feel like he'll still develop into a very solid player, and he's expected to be, a top 6 player in this league, obviously. Thomas Bordeleau is another guy that I keep hearing. He hasn't exactly lit it up in the AHL. I think he has like 35 points in about 53, 54 games, something like that. Maybe there's still a little bit of some upside there, but for the most part, the Sharks are still looking to build. They don't really quite have a new foundation yet. Bedard would be a part of that, but for him, I don't think the fit is there. Again, I want Bedard to be on a competitive team, and I don't see the Sharks being anywhere close to that for the next 5 years at the very least. Getting into the official top 5 list here, coming in at number 5 for Connor Bedard's ideal fit, I got the Arizona Coyotes. Although I don't really care for the organization, they just barely made the cut simply because I feel like they're slightly ahead in terms of the rebuild. Now, similarly to the other honorable mention teams, the Coyotes are definitely far away. It's going to take a while for them to contend anyway, with or without Bedard. But I feel like at least, in comparison to those other teams, except for Chicago, who's clearly rebuilding, the Coyotes do have a clear direction. They are tanking. They are rebuilding. They're moving in the right direction. They drafted pretty well as of late. Obviously, you already have a great foundation with Clayton Keller there and Nick Schmaltz. That's a great duo that they have there. You guys who have finally developed, both of them are near point per game players. So those are really good pieces you can already build around. You add Connor Bedard, and that makes them, a very young core, especially up front, that's going to be loaded for years to come. Other prospects that are notable, Logan Cooley, who potentially has the highest offensive ceiling of that past draft of 2022. As well as Dylan Gunther, who was huge in that World Junior Championships. I believe he scored the golden goal to win gold medal there. And that's another guy that also played with Bedard at that World Junior Championships. Connor Geekie is somebody else who I feel like is a very underrated prospect and has a very high offensive ceiling. So I think from the team aspect, it just makes all the sense given the foundation that they've already built, and they have a very solid prospect pool. I think Connor Bedard would be a huge addition to that team. and they're a team that's going to be, pretty scary down the line, just given how much elite offensive talent, or at least their ceilings seem to be very high for that Coyotes team. But the ultimate reason why I have the Coyotes sneaking into this top 5 list is the needs of their franchise. I don't think there's any franchise that is more desperate need of a superstar box office player like Connor Bedard. The Arizona Coyotes have been just an awful organization. They've been, consistently losing money every year. They don't even have their technical own home arena just yet. It's just been a little bit of a mess. There's been a lot of talks about them relocating. I don't think Gary Bettman wants that to happen. But, the Coyotes would definitely could use a guy like Connor Bedard, because he is the type of guy who will sell tickets and put butts into seats. And he could make the Coyotes a lot more money. And, similar to a guy like, Mario Lemieux, who saved the Penguins franchise when they were, almost filed for bankruptcy, and Sidney Crosby did that yet again. A guy like Connor Bedard is so box office and so elite, and that generational piece that could single-handedly rescue this Arizona Coyotes franchise. This is just a guy who's obviously capable of doing tremendous things, even though he hasn't played in the league yet. We all know what he's capable of, given his, his track record to this point. The Coyotes definitely need a franchise superstar like that, and I feel like he is a fit just given their young talent. But they're only 5 on my list. I don't care for the organization. I feel like there's other teams that are going to be a lot more competitive, a lot more sooner if they get a guy like Connor Bedard. So let's get into number 4. So coming in at number 4 for Connor Bedard's ideal fit, I got the Vancouver Canucks, and I just feel like adding this type of player to that team, it would kind of answer a lot of questions as to, as it pertains to the direction that this team is going in. A lot of people were kind of confused with their trade deadline, adding Filip Hronek. They didn't really sell off many assets. I think a lot of people are just wondering, like, where is this team going? They've been rebuilding for a while. Are they retooling or whatever? Right now it just seems like they're stuck in mediocrity. But bringing a franchise generational box office guy like Connor Bedard, does that put that narrative to an end? Are they finally finished with the label of being just a mediocre mid-team in the NHL? And of course, team-wise, he's already, he would add to an elite core that they already have there. They got really good players: JT Miller, Elias Pettersson, Quinn Hughes, leading the way. Andrei Kuzmenko I did include. I do believe he has that elite potential. He has had a really solid season this year, and I think he's definitely a piece that the Canucks should build around. From the team aspect, it just makes sense, when you also add in the fact that they added to the blue line with Filip Hronek, Thatcher Demko, who's looked spectacular since coming back from injury, and I fully expect him to have a bounce-back season if he is to remain a Vancouver Canuck for next year. If you add Connor Bedard to that core, they could be a lot better than people think if they don't completely disappoint again and completely implode like they always seem to do, always underachieve in my opinion. But, you add him to that roster and they're instantly a competitive team. And in a weaker Western Conference, they're maybe get themselves back into playoff discussions. So I think the Canucks as a team would make the perfect sense for him to be a part of. It's obviously good for the franchise, the hometown kid, he loves the Vancouver Canucks, his favorite team. That would just rejuvenate the fan base, a new era in Vancouver. The Canucks being relevant is good for the sport of hockey. Any Canadian team that's relevant, obviously it works wonders, financially and all that, and just in terms of, promotional and selling the team out to the fan base. And also, the one thing that obviously is a must watch is those Western Canadian matchups. Now you got Connor McDavid, the current generational talent in our league versus the future generational talent in our league in Connor Bedard. Having those guys go head to head 4 times a year, even if they meet in the playoffs, that's something else to even consider as well. But just the matchup, the storyline, that would be incredible to have him on the West Coast as well. And there would be no excuse for people to not want to stay up late, out east to watch those games. So that's another reason why the Canucks could use a guy like Connor Bedard. This is where my list gets a little bit dicey because I feel like the top 3, depending on the person, can really be interchangeable. But you know what? I have the reasonings for all of them. Anyway, number 3 on the list for Connor Bedard's ideal fit, I'm going with the Anaheim Ducks. Now, I feel like a lot of fans would prefer to see Connor Bedard become an Anaheim Duck, just giving already the nasty young core that they have there. I mean, my main headline here, Bedard and Trevor Zegras on the same team. Like, that's must-see TV, right? Unlike some of these teams under, the Ducks have a great established core already and are far ways further along the rebuild compared to teams like Arizona and Chicago, just to name a couple. And they already have some great prospects that are up and coming as well. Lucas Dostal is the future number one goaltender for the Anaheim Ducks, and he's looked pretty solid in some of the games that I've seen this season from him. And also Olin Zellweger is another guy you can add to that young blue line to complement guys like Jamie Drysdale. And I just feel like obviously the forward group, Mason McTavish, who had chemistry with Connor Bedard at World Juniors a couple of years back, having those guys, reconnect. Obviously the Ducks are hoping that they can get Connor Bedard because there's a lot of guys on this team that would just complement his game very, very well. From a team perspective, just given these guys, if they develop, you add Connor Bedard, they become a significantly better team. And especially in the Western Conference, similar to Vancouver, I think the Ducks could legitimately push themselves in the discussion for the playoffs as soon as the following season if Connor Bedard does land in their laps. From a franchise perspective, it would just further promote the game in Salary, California. You add another box office free agent. It's going to do well for them financially. It's going to be a lot more jersey sales. Obviously, TV ratings are going to go up. People are going to want to see Anaheim. People out east probably would be willing to stay up 10-30. That they're going to want to see this team play. They're going to be probably the most exciting team in the NHL without question. I would go as far as say they might be the most exciting team the Ducks franchise has ever seen. Despite the time when they were winning the Stanley Cup in 2007, and even like in the, early mid 2010s when they were among the best teams in the NHL and consistently contending for the Stanley Cup, went on a couple of conference finals runs. It was a veteran team. They weren't very flashy. There wasn't a lot of exciting players. They were just gritty, just guys who knew their role and just, were efficient and got the job done. But with this exciting team, the amount of skill set, the amount of skill and talent on that team, I don't think it's ever become close in the history of the Ducks franchise. You add Bedard to that, and I feel like they'd be making more money. They'd be getting more TV ratings. People would actually freaking care about the Anaheim Ducks because I feel like even when they were good, not a lot of people played close attention to them unless you are a diehard hockey fan or a Ducks fan, obviously. No one really cared about Anaheim. And I feel like now that you add Bedard to that franchise, potentially, I feel like any hockey fan would care about the Anaheim Ducks more than ever, in my opinion. 1 and 2 were very close, in my opinion, for this list. But at number 2, for Connor Bedard's ideal fit, I got the Columbus Blue Jackets. And naturally, I would be very ecstatic to see the Blue Jackets draft Connor Bedard. As it currently stands, I believe they are the worst team in the NHL. So if the season ended today, they would have the best odds to get that number 1 overall pick. And obviously, they would use it on Bedard, who wouldn't. But for this team, I feel like they have one of the most exciting up-and-coming teams in the NHL. You add him to that dressing room, and they are quickly back to relevance once again. They were a pretty good playoff team not too long ago. A couple of rough years the past couple of years, especially this season, very injury prone. A lot of people thought they were going to take a significant step forward, and that was not the case. In fact, the opposite happened. They actually regressed despite getting a franchise talent in Johnny Gaudreau. But adding him, playing alongside Johnny Gaudreau and Patrick Laine and some of the other young guys that they have, Kirill Marchenko as well has had a really solid season, one of their better goal scorers on the team right now. They would be a very competitive team as soon as next season, and definitely would be a contender not too far down the line, just given the amazing prospects that they have coming up, led by David Jiricek, who I think is going to be an absolute stud number 1 defenseman in the NHL to complement some of the other blue liners that they have on their team, Adam Boqvist, Zach Werenski, Jake Bean. There's definitely other blue liners on that pipeline that just have extremely bright futures. So I think the Blue Jackets are definitely on the up and up, and adding Connor Bedard would make them a must-see TV type of team as well. And this would be just the best case scenario for the franchise because there's already a step in the right direction by the fact that they actually signed Johnny Gaudreau, who was the big fish free agent in the offseason last year. And he decided to go to the Columbus Blue Jackets. And that kind of took everybody by surprise, but that means a lot for the city of Columbus, having a superstar talent who wants to go to Ohio. And of course, if they draft Connor Bedard, that's just another step forward in the franchise and how this team could really, grow some revenue and, sell a lot more tickets and just be a much more relevant franchise in regards to the entire NHL world. And obviously the viewership would skyrocket if you have another box office guy with Connor Bedard playing alongside Gaudreau, like I mentioned earlier. And also the free agent aspect, because you already got a free agent in Johnny Gaudreau, adding Bedard would certainly bring other free agents to want to come and play for Columbus, Ohio. I mean, guys will want to play with Connor Bedard just given how electrifying of a talent he is. And obviously that would mean great things for this organization, and just given where this team is currently. Coming in at number 1 for who I feel would be the best fit for Connor Bedard. Connor Bedard's ideal fit. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, but I'm going to make the case for them. This might be maybe as biased as I'll ever get for me on this channel, but I truly believe they are the best fit for Connor Bedard. It's his ideal fit to go to the Montreal Canadiens. So we'll talk about it here. Now, going into the season, most of the teams that you see here had a little bit of higher expectations. I think we can all agree that the Blue Jackets, some people picked the Blue Jackets to make the playoffs, and things didn't work out, and now they're at the bottom of the standings. Anaheim was expected to take a step forward. They haven't. The Canucks were expected to be much more competitive. Some people, including myself, did pick the Canucks to make the playoffs. So all those teams that we mentioned all had expectations already to be a better team. Montreal did not have those expectations, but despite the fact they have had better seasons than all three of those teams I mentioned, given all the injuries they've had, they've still managed to be insanely competitive. Apart from the month of December where they were absolutely awful, they've been essentially in every single game they've played. I've watched all the games. They've been right neck and neck with their opponents, even good teams. They've beaten good teams like the Devils and the Oilers and the Islanders. They had a pretty good streak there. You add a guy like Connor Bedard, this team's already competitive with the depth they have, with the young core that they already have established. This team would just be on a completely different level, in my opinion. Which brings me to my main point. What separates the Montreal Canadiens as the ideal fit for Connor Bedard in comparison to the rest of these teams? Now, in comparison to some of the teams I have on the bottom here, the Arizona Coyotes, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Montreal Canadiens already have that core established. They got Nick Suzuki. They got Cole Caulfield. They got Kirby Dach. They got a very young blue line that exceeded all expectations as rookies for most of them. Jordan Harris and Caden Gooley, who was spectacular, even though he had some injuries, has been great this season. Arbor Xhekaj has been a pleasant surprise as well. They just have a bright future. They have a core that's being established. A lot of young players, a lot of great prospects coming up. Lane Hudson, Sean Farrell, who probably going to be playing towards the end of the season. Joshua Waugh, a guy that shared a line with Connor Bedard in those World Juniors, so there's some familiarity there. They have a lot of really steals of picks that they have that are absolutely exceeding expectations in terms of their development. And I just feel like for Connor Bedard, he is that franchise piece that Montreal is missing. In comparison to those other teams, the Vancouver Canucks, you could argue they already have their franchise players. They have Elias Pettersson. They have Quinn Hughes. Anaheim, arguably, Trevor Zegras is their franchise player. Now, his statistics would say he's not at that level yet, but I believe he will get to that level. He definitely has the potential to be a perennial 30-goal, 85, 90-point player. That is basically franchise tier talent, in my opinion. And the Columbus Blue Jackets, they got their franchise player in the offseason in Johnny Gaudreau. The difference between those teams and Montreal is missing that franchise player. I don't believe Nick Suzuki has that ceiling to be a franchise player. Cole Caulfield might be one of the better goal scorers. He could be a perennial 40-goal scorer, but he's not a guy that I expect to exceed 60, 65 points, maybe 70 if he ever gets to 50 at some point in his career. So I feel like Connor Bedard, just given where this team is already with the young core that they have around them, they're more like supporting cast, in my opinion. They're missing that one main lead guy, that franchise number one centerman, that true number one centerman. And Connor Bedard could be that guy that fits right in perfectly with this team. And that's why he's the ideal fit, because that's something that the Montreal Canadiens are lacking, a franchise talent. And I just feel like with the way the progression has become for a lot of these younger players, especially on that blue line, they are further ahead than most people think in the rebuild. I would argue they might be further ahead than the likes of the Ducks and the Blue Jackets. And just given where they are, they're already a competitive team. You add Connor Bedard, they're instantly in the discussion for the playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. In my opinion, they're much more competitive. They probably don't make the playoffs. I like even next year, with or without him, I still don't think they're making the playoffs because the East is just way too tough. But in 2-3 years' time, I could easily see the Montreal Canadiens being one of those contenders in the Eastern Conference if they added that franchise piece to, their main core, basically. I know most fans would be upset with that take. They're probably going to say that I'm being biased and we're not even going to be anywhere close for the next 5 years or whatever. I just think you guys are underrating our core, and I think we're going to be there pretty soon, especially if you add a guy like Connor Bedard. They're definitely going to make a lot of noise in the short term. And obviously, in terms of their franchise, I mean, it's a big market advantage. I feel like for a talent like Connor Bedard, I feel like it's only good for the league to have him play for a big market. It just makes the most sense to me. I truly believe no franchise would treat this guy better, or no fan base, because Montreal, it's a religion here. It's just not the same anywhere else. I've been to other cities. They don't know hockey like they do it here. It's just a fact. I'm sorry to break it to you guys, but that is what it is, right? And obviously the free agency factor, more enticing. Again, like Columbus, you want to play with a guy like Bedard. I guess for any of these teams, you can make that case, but especially for Montreal, it doesn't really attract many free agents mainly because, it's in Canada, there's taxes and also the language barrier. The government would want people to learn French, and I have my opinions on that, and, I don't agree with it. I won't really dissect into that much more. But yeah, obviously, having Bedard would definitely put them more in the conversation to attract other free agents and make the Habs that much more of a monster powerhouse team. Now, I'm not saying with Connor Bedard, they are an instant contender by any means, but just given the situation they're in with their young core developing super well, they're definitely going to be a much better team than people think. You add Bedard to that team, and they're definitely going to be ready to take off and take the league by surprise. I truly, firmly believe that. So hate me in the comments if you want for being biased, but I really wanted to make the case for them. I feel like it is the best fit for him, given where they are currently in their retool process. And again, in case it isn't clear, this is Connor Bedard's ideal fit, not which team deserves him the most. I don't think Montreal is a team that deserves him the most because they're not obviously the worst team in the league. They already drafted first overall last year, Juraj Slafkovsky, but I don't really see him being an elite talent. I think he might just be like a high top 6 player. Could be a guy who maybe gets like 30 goals, 60, 65 points in his prime. But he's not even close to what Connor Bedard is. I mean, really very few people are in terms of just where they rank in terms of a prospect. He's like McDavid level. He's franchise. He's elite. Way more than elite. He's franchise. He's generational. He's in that tier. He's just that good. So it's the ideal fit for him. I feel like, for me, like I said, my main argument, I want to see a guy like Connor Bedard playing for a competitive franchise right out of the gate. So if any team of Anaheim, Columbus, Vancouver, if those teams draft him, I would be pumped to see that, because that would be amazing for those franchises, and they would be, they would take a massive step forward. But for me, I feel like Montreal is the best fit just because they're missing that franchise player. And I feel like of those teams who could be competitive, they would definitely deserve him the most. But that's just my opinion. With that is going to wrap up this video talking about Connor Bedard and the teams that I feel are the best fit for him personally. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. This was a lot of fun to do. Connor Bedard is a generational talent. He's going to be one of the better players in the NHL. I firmly believe that. And, we'll see what happens with him. Good luck to all those bad teams in the draft lottery. I hope my Habs get him. And obviously, I feel like he's a good fit. But anyway, thank you guys for watching again. Please leave a like. Consider subscribing to the channel if you ever are so kind. And I will talk to you in the next video.